But yeah, I don't want to drag us down too far. I don't want to drag myself down too far, especially if it's just me right now. But we'll get sad later on. But yeah, so let's talk about release the hostages. Why does nobody want to release the hostages? What is the problem with everyone? Okay, well, if you know anything about anything, you know that there have been several attempts to release the hostages and make deals. However, those deals have not gone through because of the denial of agreements, basically from the Israeli side, essentially, is what it's broken down into. So let's check out GDF's video on release the hostages.
To all the dads. To all the dead.
So this was speaking of sports, this was the commercial that was aired during the Super Bowl by the Israeli government, I believe.
120 days. We vow to bring you home.
Yeah, there you go.
To anyone that is
oh god, this dork.
demanding for a ceasefire, let's be
Hold on, this volume's kind of low. I hate that I have to crank things up and pull them back down.
Why aren't you protesting to bring them all home right now?
Bring them all home.
Bring all of these people back home now.
Do you see this thing? Mm-hmm. You know what it is?
Oh god, this dork.
This says bring them home. The hostages.
Adams, you're complicit in the genocide of Palestinians. I just want to know how many Palestinian
Eric Adams,
children, how many
the mayor of New York,
children
right?
will take for you to call for a ceasefire, Eric Adams. That's all I want to know.
Bring the hostages home.
Wow.
Per the New York Times, as talks continued in Cairo toward an Israel-Hamas ceasefire, Israeli media reported on Wednesday that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had told his negotiators not to take part.
So let me pause it right there. This video came out 12 hours ago. So that story that he's talking about is very recent. As talks continued in Cairo about the ceasefire, they said that Netanyahu basically told his negotiators not to take part on it. So if you want to know why the hostages are not being released, that might be a major part of it right there.
The Hostages and Missing Persons Families Forum, the main alliance of the hostages' family members, responded to the reports by protesting outside the homes of Mr. Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, and Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, on Wednesday evening.
And also, there have been, and I've said this in the past, there have been a lot of protests by the people that live inside of Israel that do want their family members returned. These have been almost daily. I don't know the frequency, but I would guess at the very least every other day or weekly protests that have been going on in Tel Aviv, in Israel in general. They want this thing to end, basically. They want negotiations to be made. There are some people that are not as bloodthirsty as the IDF has portrayed themselves to be. So yes, there is conflict within Israel as far as what the stances are. We know very well what Netanyahu's stance is. Basically, his stance is as long as he can keep dropping bombs, he's going to keep on doing it until somebody tells him otherwise. Somebody tells him to do something else, right? I gotta fix that a little bit. All right, but. Not everybody is 100% on board. Well, I'll say not everybody. There have been statistics or polls that have been released as far as, are they doing too much bombing or not enough bombing or whatever. And it seems very slanted that some people think that not enough damage is being done, basically. And that sucks. But there is a percentage of people that do want this to end.
This decision amounts, in effect, to sacrificing knowingly all of the hostages' lives, the Hostages and Missing Persons Families Forum said in a statement. That's what the hostage families actually think. If alleged sexual predator Eric Adams actually bothered to learn or actually cared about the hostages.
I'm dragging his ass.
Politicians and celebrities alike have flocked to the safe option with regard to the genocide in Gaza, condemning the October 7th attack, then complete and total radio silence from there on out, while Israel deliberately induces a famine in Gaza and carries out one of the most destructive bombing campaigns in human history. No, there aren't little pictures on their Instagram stories or other virtue signaling when Israel perpetrates a Holocaust that makes October 7th look like a border skirmish.
Right.
People have rushed to the cause of the hostages. Jerry Seinfeld traveled to Israel. Celebrities adopted hostages. Jason Alexander pretended to be a little...
Hold on, they did what? Give me... Skip. Celebrities are adopting kidnapped Israelis and calling for their release. I'm sorry, what? I missed this story. I was back on Halloween.
Jason Alexander pretended to be a little boy.
This is Ochad. He's 9. In fact, he celebrated his 9th birthday days ago as a hostage of Hamas. Today, I will be his voice. Hi, I'm Ochad. I'm 9 years old.
Let me ask you this. Do celebrities and politicians actually care about the hostages? Why don't they call for a ceasefire?
Yeah.
After all, it was during the cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, a week-long ceasefire, in November that Hamas released 110 hostages. Since then, they've rescued 3 and killed 3, at least, since Hamas says that...
I think that number is 5 now, but we'll get to that part.
A good amount of them have been killed by Israel bombing. One option actually bears results. So then why aren't people who are championing the cause of the hostages calling for a ceasefire? Per the Times of Israel, it is believed that 130 hostages abducted by Hamas on October 7th remain in Gaza. Not all of them alive. After 105 civilians were released from captivity during a week-long truce in late November, and 4 hostages were released prior to that. The IDF has confirmed the deaths of 29 of those still held by Hamas, citing new intelligence and findings obtained by troops operating in Gaza. So the longer this goes on, without a ceasefire in place, the more hostages will die? Why don't Zionists want a ceasefire then?
It seems to make sense.
Why would Zionists, in effect, support keeping the hostages inside Gaza rather than negotiating to release them?
Because then they have an excuse to do this.
Why keep them inside Gaza, where they are sitting under one of the most destructive bombing campaigns ever recorded? Robert Pate told the Financial Times earlier in the month, between 1942 and 1945, the Allies bombed 51 German towns and cities, destroying some 40 to 50% of the urban areas there.
Yeah, that's... I'm sure you get to it.
This comprised some 10% of all the buildings in all of Germany. This compared to 33% of buildings across Gaza that have been totally destroyed. In Iraq, as reported by...
he said totally destroyed. 70% of buildings have been damaged in one way or another.
The Associated Press on December 22nd, during the 2014 to 2017 campaign to defeat the Islamic State in Iraq, the U.S.-led coalition carried out nearly 15,000 strikes across the country. By comparison, the Israeli military said they conducted 22,000 strikes
Christ,
in the last week.
Last week?
Why would they want them in an area where Israel has induced a famine? Why do they respond, bring the hostages home, when we call for a ceasefire, when they can only be brought home with a ceasefire? Do they want the hostages killed? Or is it not about the hostages at all? Is it about blindly supporting Israel no matter what?
Yes.
Supporting their assault on Gaza because it's Israel and don't ask any questions about it? Is it religious fundamentalism? Is it hatred? Because how could someone justify what is happening in Gaza currently if you didn't absolutely despise the people inside of Gaza? Whatever it is, and maybe there are multiple reasons, I'd like to hear from you. Talk about it in the comments, maybe join the Discord to come discuss with all of us. We'd love to have you.
So
Join
there's
that by,
something
do
that
they
he touched
want the
on here.
hostages in the last.
Yeah, that's a lot. 70% of buildings have been affected, have been damaged in one way or another. Really what's happening here and what's happening in Gaza is called kettling. I don't know if he showed a map. I don't think he did. But basically what they've done and what is a tactic in the IDF is
The
to
US
split
led
groups or to
coalition.
split. You see this happen now in protests, especially in the United States. What they'll do, or what the police force will do, is split the crowd in half and then basically do what they call kettling, where they kind of corner the crowd and then they surround them. And if it's a protest here in the United States, people would get arrested. What they've done with Gaza, though, is they've essentially split Gaza in half, northern Gaza and southern Gaza. Northern Gaza, I believe, is where the majority of the Hamas fighters are. However, there are fighters everywhere in Gaza, pretty much. But it's not as prominent as it was in northern Gaza, where there is still fighting going on. So they've kind of sectioned it off, right? And then southern Gaza is where you have 1.5 million of the Gazan, 1.5 million of Palestinians that are currently holed up in where in Rafah. What they've done so far and what they did during the Super Bowl was they started bombing them. And when they started bombing them, that's when they used the excuse of retrieving 2 hostages from that area, with saying that they were using the bombing campaign as a tactic to deter, so that they could extract people. And they killed roughly 87 to 100 or more people, I believe. That doesn't sound like a very precise campaign there. But that is what happened. Those have been the reports. And that is the tactic, is to, instead of just kettling people, it seems like they're kettling them into a concentrated area where they can go out. And there have been several warnings from several other countries about what they're doing right now, about what the IDF is conducting right now with Rafah, and basically saying don't do it. And it seems like it's something that they have planned out, they have strategized, and this is with the Palestinian people. This is not with actually Hamas themselves. Hamas themselves are pretty much holed up in underground tunnels, 200 or more miles, I believe it's been said, of underground tunneling that is in Gaza, that is under Gaza, that the bombings do not get to. They don't reach that area as to where they are. So it seems like this campaign to defeat Hamas is really a campaign to wipe out the Palestinians that are currently in Gaza. And that's what it has been so far. I believe the death count is 28,000 plus at this point. So, yeah. But as far as what gets reported to Western media, so back in January 16th, Israeli propaganda repeated by all Western media. Hamas killed hostages, including this guy. And then it comes out a month later, which is today. Yeah, okay, we actually killed them ourselves, exactly like Hamas said originally. So this was the story. Israel says, of course, it always starts with Israel says, Hamas has killed 2 of the 3 hostages seen in recent videos. And then recently, Times of Israel released this story the other day, and they say IDF hostage was likely killed as a result of an IDF strike. So I think what we've seen is a lot of that's not true come out from the IDF channels, where they try to influence the story, and then Western media takes the story, runs with it, and says this is what we're being told. very similar to what Western media and what media in the United States does with police reporting. Anytime something happens, the police report is what's the first thing that's going to be shown on the news. Not the investigative journalism that the reporters would be doing, the reporters that are on the ground that do investigate the stories, where they try to get all sides of the story that's happening, where they try to get as much information as possible from not only the authorities, but also from possibly the victims, the perpetrator, witnesses, and try to build a story that way. That is reporting. When you do a story like that, that is reporting. When you repeat what the authorities have given as a statement, that in itself is propaganda. That is being a mouthpiece to the authorities, basically. And that really is what we've seen so far in a lot of this. We've seen that, for example, the hospital bombing, the first one that came out. The first thing that we were being told was no, it was Hamas. It was a rocket that fell backwards, and it blew up the building. And there's no way that the IDF would ever commit such a horrible act. They would never do some sort of terrorism like that. Not the most moral army in the world. Cut to a few months later, and just about every single hospital in Gaza has been either destroyed or is inoperable or has been severely damaged or is not functioning the way that a hospital should be functioning. What happened to the story there is that basically it's called running interference. You run interference on stories so that you can do what you want to do and nobody questions what you're doing. Also, it's kind of like a ratcheting effect in that, oh, well, we did this, it was kind of bad, and the public got mad about it, but we're going to say that that it was Hamas themselves, they did it. So that way, the next time somebody asks, well, the first thing they're going to think is that it was Hamas that did it. And then if they don't think that, then sure, we'll come out a month later.
What you got. Good job.
Thank you, Pogs and Jello Terry. That is my alert for the follow, by the way. I have a lot of funky alerts. But if you're from Threads, let me know. Let me know in the chat. That seems to be the general idea as far as the information that is coming from the IDF. They release it through their own outlets. They make sure that it looks good for them, and then that's all right. That's all good. I interrupt my own flow all the time. That's generally the way that that this propaganda has gone, and it's really been a propaganda campaign. It really kind of, when I say it's a ratcheting effect, it's like, okay, well, they tried to blow up one hospital, everybody got mad, they blamed it on Hamas, and then like everybody was just like conflicting and fighting amongst each other, and while they were doing that, they bombed 12 more hospitals. So that's kind of the idea, right? It's like, oh, well, nobody's going to be talking about this because everybody's busy fighting amongst themselves in social media and in the public and whatnot. So while you guys are busy, like say the Super Bowl's on, let's go finish what we're doing. Let's go blow up a whole university, or just do this hostage rescue in Rafah and see how many people we can kill while everybody's busy watching Taylor Swift and whatnot on TV, on all of Western media. It has been that, and it's been a lot of that. And if this is, for example, the UNRWA building. And this is, no image has been able to capture Israel's contempt for the international community quite like this one, where they blew a hole. I would assume that's a tank, a shell that made that, and they just kind of like destroyed the building. And this is shocking footage. This is from UNRWA on the 15th, which is yesterday. Shocking footage shows unimaginable destruction in Gaza City, including our health center. 70% of civilian infrastructure, including homes, hospitals, and schools, have been destroyed or severely damaged. 84% of health facilities have been affected by the attacks. Nowhere is safe. This is what Gaza looks like. I don't think... Is there audio? I don't think there's any audio. Yeah, there's no audio here. But yeah, this is a complete destruction of Gaza is what has been attempted. That right there is apocalyptic. They said that people did return to northern Gaza. They haven't reported as to what happens with those people. Last I've seen is that there have been several videos of the IDF still in northern Gaza. There were reports back when they were saying that there was going to be a ceasefire, that they were negotiating or in first stages of negotiation for a ceasefire. There's been nothing, as far as I've seen, that goes into further detail as to what people are going through in northern Gaza. I think the estimates last I saw is there's still 300,000 people living in these conditions, with of course shelling and bombing still happening. Of course, there is fighting going on between Hamas as they come out and RPG a tank and then go back into their tunnel systems. So if and like I said, like I've always said on threads, that we live in a war zone in the United States because everybody has guns and you never know when somebody's going to start shooting. This is literally living in a war zone where buildings are being blown up. It's the same thing basically in southern Gaza, where tent cities are being bombed. It's a horrible, horrible condition to live in. Yeah, I hope this ends soon. But let's get further into this. So this is GDF's other video that he put out recently. I thought it was very good. CNN is actually evil. So he's going to go into kind of, and I would say this is an example of what Western media is currently doing with any information that they receive from the IDF.
The drama started on February 4th.
The
Guardian reported CNN is facing a backlash from its own staff over editorial policies they say have led to a regurgitation of Israeli propaganda. They said broadcasts have been skewed by management edicts and a story approval process. This on top of the restrictions placed on their reporting already by the Israeli military, which we know from a candid admission from Fareed Zakaria.
I should note that journalists embedded with the IDF in Gaza operate under the observation of Israeli commanders in the field and are not permitted to move unaccompanied within the Gaza Strip.
So they're not allowed to go anywhere outside of their view of the commander. This is back in November.
To enter Gaza under IDF escort, outlets have to submit all materials and footage to the Israeli military for review prior to publication.
In the words of one CNN staffer, ultimately, CNN's coverage of the Israel-Gaza war amounts to journalistic malpractice.
And this is why I haven't been watching anything CNN related, because I already knew this. I could watch 5 minutes of CNN coverage, and I already knew that it has to be approved by the IDF in order for CNN to air it.
The Guardian spoke with 6 CNN staffers and obtained more than a dozen internal memos and emails. They spoke of tight restrictions on quoting Hamas and reporting other Palestinian perspectives, while Israeli government statements are taken at face value. Troublingly, every story on the conflict must be cleared by the Jerusalem Bureau before broadcast or publication. In a shocking admission, one CNN staffer is quoted as saying, "Nearly every report, no matter how damning, relieves Israel of wrongdoing." In this viral interview with Rami Igra, a retired senior intelligence officer, Anderson Cooper watched him say,
"One little note, the non-combatant population in the Gaza Strip is really a non-existent term because..."
The non-combatant population in the Gaza Strip is really a non-existent term.
All of the Gazans voted for the Hamas, and as we have seen on the 7th of October, most of the population in the Gaza Strip are Hamas.
Cooper did not...
Hold the fuck on with that, with that fucking comment. Couple of conflicts there, sir. First of all, the average age of the population of people in Gaza is roughly 18 years old, which Hamas was elected into the government position more than 18 years ago, or I believe around 18 years ago. So unless 0 to 3-year-olds could vote at that point in time, or whatever the age could be, then no, that's a dumbass comment, because half of those people didn't exist when Hamas came into power as a government entity. Secondly, the people that went across the wall on the 7th of October was roughly anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 people, and I believe only like 1,500 of those were actual IQB fighters from the brigades. They said that there was other people that were just interested in going over to see what it was like outside of the wall. A lot of these people have grown up inside the walls and have never known what it's like to be outside of Gaza. There were even reports of people going into homes that had been evacuated and just like cooking a meal because they've never seen a lot of things, or watching Netflix because they had never seen those types of living environments. Basically, they've only lived in Gaza their entire life. So sure, I mean, yeah, I guess, you know, all 2 million people that live in Gaza are Hamas, according to this guy.
In the Gaza Strip are Hamas.
Cooper did not challenge him on either point. By the time the interview aired on November 19th, more than 13,000 people had been killed in Gaza, most of them civilians. The CNN staffers also took issue with another anchor, Jake.
And hold on, and that's another problem that they have, is the IDF has no way to know if they actually killed somebody that is associated with Hamas, or that is actually a member of the IQB, the Qassam Brigades, that is the military wing of Hamas. What they rely on is the actual Gaza government to tell them how many people have died.
Tapper. In one segment, Tapper acknowledged the death.
And I'm sorry, to finish that thought about how many people have died, and then what they do with that number of, they take the number of how many people have died, and they say, oh, okay, well, how many of them were men? And then they take that number and they say, okay, all of the men were Hamas.
Death and
That's their math.
Innocent Palestinians in Gaza, but appeared to defend the scale of the Israeli attack on Gaza.
What exactly did Hamas think the Israeli military would do?
What exactly did Hamas think the Israeli military would do in response to that, he said, referring to the attack on October 7th. The staffers were, of course, there for the 40 babies fiasco, which they had plenty to say about. First off, the report was broadcast unchallenged.
Babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated.
And CNN reporters even used the lurid tale to assert that there can never be peace with Hamas.
This kind of thing and the way that this has happened has really changed any possibility of a relationship, a peace accord between Israel and Gaza and Hamas.
I mean, how can you when you're dealing with people who would do such atrocities? We literally have video of these
of
these terrorists doing that, doing exactly what they say they're not doing to civilians and to children.
Turns out they didn't literally have video.
Obviously have proof of this. There is video of so much of what happened and the terror that unfolded there.
Except, as a CNN journalist pointed out, the network did not have such video, and apparently neither did anyone else.
Oh, God.
Indeed, even after the White House walked back Biden's embarrassing gaffe,
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
Saying that it was what they heard from Israel, obviously, CNN Vice President and Senior Editorial Director Tim Langmaid told the newsroom it could still report the Israeli government assertions. The Guardian also quotes CNN's own Clarissa Ward, who became the only foreign journalist to enter Gaza without an Israeli escort for only 2 hours. She said, "The response to our report on Gaza in Israeli media suggests an unspoken reason for denying access. When asked on air about our piece, one reporter from the Israeli Channel 13 replied, 'If indeed Western reporters begin to enter Gaza, this will for sure be a big headache for Israel and Israeli Hasbara.'"
Yes.
Simple.
And Hasbara, again, if you're not familiar with the term Hasbara, literally translates into like explaining. It is the Hasbara department of the IDF, or the Israeli government, is their propaganda outlet, essentially. Their job is to do all of this, basically interfere with the news and make sure that their message is priority when it gets reported.
Simply put.
And I do follow a lot of their news channels, is it I-24 News? Well, I forgot what the other ones are, but I have them on my on YouTube. Most news outlets these days actually post all of their stories to their YouTube channels, so very easy to access this stuff.
CNN's policy that all news on Palestine be cleared by their Jerusalem bureau means Israel censors the news, as reported in The Intercept. Like all foreign news organizations operating in Israel...
Oh, give me 1 second. I want to see that story. CNN runs Gaza coverage past Jerusalem team operating under shadow of IDF censor. The Jerusalem Bureau has long reviewed all CNN stories relating to Israel and Palestine. Now it's helping shape the network's coverage of the war. Another thing that's also come out is I think it's the Qatari government has been told by the IDF to basically censor Al Jazeera, which is
like
a
all
story in
foreign
itself.
news organizations operating in Israel, CNN's Jerusalem Bureau is subject to the rules of the Israel Defense Forces censor, which dictates subjects that are off limits for news organizations to cover, and censors articles it deems unfit or unsafe to print. In order to obtain a press pass in Israel, foreign reporters must sign a document agreeing to abide by the dictates of the censor. They're referring to a unit in the Israeli Defense Force Directorate of Military Intelligence called the Israeli Military Censor, headed by a chief...
Oh, by the way, if you ever see Swords of Iron, like it says right here, Swords of Iron is the current campaign that the IDF is executing in Gaza. Yeah.
Called the Israeli Military Censor.
It's always something iron. They're really obsessed with the term iron. Like the Iron Dome, the Iron Sting... I don't know, the Iron Dildo.
Headed by a chief censor. This unit censors thousands of articles a year. The Intercept also reveals more evidence of CNN's internal practices of censorship. Early in the war, on October 26th, CNN's News Standards and Practices Division sent an email to staff outlining how they should write about the war. Hamas controls the government in Gaza, and we should describe the Ministry of Health as Hamas-controlled. Whenever we are referring to casualty statistics or other claims related to the present conflict. If the underlying statistics have been derived from the Ministry of Health in Gaza, we should note that fact, and that this part of the ministry is Hamas-controlled.
So that term right there, controlled, is something that other people use to describe what they deem authoritarian or dictatorship governments. Anytime they say, oh, well, that media is state-controlled media. It's funny because in the United States, nobody ever calls our media capitalist-controlled media, even though it is. It is obviously controlled by all the strings attached to capitalism. But yeah, to point out that something is controlled by an entity is to basically kind of damn the information that's coming from it.
Even if the statistics are released by the West Bank, part of the ministry, or elsewhere.
Which the West Bank is controlled by, still controlled by Israel. But the West Bank is represented by the Palestinian Authority, or what is left of the PLO, or Fatah, if you want to go by that name.
Mondoweiss praised The Guardian's reporting, but said it lacked one detail: why CNN has such bias. Indeed, starting at the top, Mondoweiss editor-in-chief Philip Weiss looks to the CEO of CNN's owner, none other than Warner Brothers Discovery. David Zaslav, the CEO of CNN's parent company, is a Zionist.
Oh, surprise.
The Guardian leaves out the angle because it is afraid that bringing up the Israel lobby will foster anti-Semitism. But I would argue that
Definitely
religious
happened.
ideology is the most important factor at work. Weiss provides evidence, linking an interview with Zadlov in 2019 for the Israeli I-24 news station.
There's
I love
I-24.
Israel. Yeah. I remember one Christmas with my whole family walking into the King David and remembering what happened to the King David, and thinking about how lucky we are to have Israel and what it took, and the strength of the Haganah and the Irgun and the heart of the Israeli people to fight for a free democracy.
Zaslav is praising a right-wing terrorist force, the Irgun, for blowing up a wing of the King David Hotel in 1946. The bombing killed 91 people, including...
So, funny story about dates here, right? King David bombing was in 1946. What is it that they say? The creation of Israel is in 1948? I'm sorry, what?
Hotel in
Something to look into.
1946. The bombing killed 91 people, including many civilians. The Irgun also led terrorist operations against Palestinians. Those include the ethnic cleansing of Jaffa, in which Palestinians were forced to flee, and the massacre in the village of Deir Yassin. Additionally, Weiss names another towering figure at CNN, that of the network's newsroom chief, one Virginia Mosley, officially the executive editor.
Joining me now to talk about the war in Israel is the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, Tom Nides. We should disclose that he is married to CNN Executive Vice President Virginia Mosley. Thank you so much for coming on.
The Guardian article came just days after an interview on CNN with Mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, Abdullah Hammoud, conducted by another anchor on the program, Miss Dana Bash.
We here in Dearborn, the broader Arab American community, the Muslim American community, we know what it's like to live overseas, under siege, under apartheid, under occupation.
Yeah, and as you know, there are a lot of people who don't agree with the notion that there's apartheid or occupation. That's another conversation.
I guarantee you there's somebody in her ear running interference and saying, don't let him say that. Make sure that you say probably all the shit she's saying right now.
You know, the question...
I would just push back on that and say that international law recognizes the occupation. United Nations resolutions recognize the occupation, and the fact that's unfolding is apartheid. Every apartheid expert across the globe recognizes this crisis for what it is. Having somebody's political idea for what's unfolding versus reality is what the problem is here.
Okay, and there are a lot of people who disagree with...
And that's, so whenever the news has somebody that is representing a counterpoint, essentially, to what the popular narrative is, Biden losing support from Muslims, right? This person has himself and everything that he's gone through in order to get him to this point. As far as knowledge and as far as debate and information that he can go off of, right? This person probably doesn't know a lot about the subject because, let's be real, most anchors are just actors. They have, however, a team of people in their ear telling them exactly what to say, probably things that have been rehearsed, things that they probably don't understand if they're not real investigative journalists. So all of this information, all of this pushback that she's giving right now is most likely being given by somebody that's in the director's chair or in the directing room, and
some of those
feeding her this
conclusions
information.
and the notion of occupation. There are a lot of people who say you can't occupy a land that you came from initially.
Bash is just showing that the ideologically justified and inspired beliefs do not stop at the newsroom chair, multiple other anchors, reporters, CEO of the parent company, etc. Indeed, it appears that apologia for Israel's crimes against humanity is deeply embedded in CNN's current apparatus. But CNN is only one news station.
Certainly seems like it.
As William Humans, media studies professor at George Washington University, has shown, the problem persists at ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC. In examining the Sunday news programs for these networks from the period of October 8th, 2023 to January 14th, 2024, 51 shows, the overwhelming majority of guests, 100 out of 140, were...
Yeah, and then you have Anthony Blinken. You have several other people that are Zionist in United States, not only media but also representatives of the government. You have warmongers that favor this this war, quote unquote.
Were American.
Yeah.
Israelis made up the second most common nationality. Notably, only...
I want to go back to that graphic. Oop. Okay. Huh. Very odd there. CBS. Wow. Look at that. CBS having some sort of representation, as very little as it is. But that's surprising. Fox News, not surprising at all.
Second most common nationality. Notably, only one Palestinian national, Hussam Zomla, the head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom, was a guest on any of these shows. He appeared on Face the Nation. From this guest booking pattern, 10 times as many Israeli guests as Palestinians, it is expected that pro-Israel views would be dominant, except that both Israeli and Palestinian interviewees were few compared to the prevalence of American guests. What really matters then is what these Americans were saying.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thanks so much.
So, as far as what the Americans are saying, he kind of showed in here Meet the Press, which Meet the Press is one of the shows that comes on Sunday. I try to watch it or get up as early as possible to watch it. There's Tom Cotton, who's also pro-Israel. There's Anthony Blinken, who's obviously helping the IDF. A lot of these guests that they have on, if they are part of the United States government, they are most likely going to be pro-Israel. Because, again, Israel is an ally. We wouldn't necessarily talk shit about an ally. You can see basically what happened to John Fetterman with his dumbass. He is now basically wearing the Israeli flag as a cape. I don't know if he wears it as a diaper too, but that would probably make sense to me. Yeah, that was pretty much the end of the video. That's GDF. I think GDF does some really good videos. He kind of made his claim to fame on some of these other videos of him talking about how our U.S. soldiers kind of got murked in a lot of wars, especially a lot of recent wars. I wouldn't call any war recently a win in the last probably 40 years. And he goes into a lot of why that really is the case. Yeah, speaking of representatives that are kind of Zionists, this is from the Times of Israel, and former Democratic representative defeats IDF veteran in New York special election. Tom Suzy, I think that's how I pronounce his name. Excuse me if I don't pronounce it right. Recently won this special election that was this position that was abandoned by George Santos. Mazi Philip was the loser. She is also a former Israeli citizen, I believe, and she served in the IDF. Yeah, there's a lot of elements of the IDF and favorability to the Israeli government. In our government in itself.
The con artist turned cameo star with Mazi Melissa Phillip, a Democrat. Who is she? We don't know the exact year Philip was born. Wikipedia
Democrat?
says 1978 or 1979. And not that it really matters, but we are talking about the proposed replacement for the guy who Catch Me If You Can'd his way into Congress here. So getting the facts this time around would be ideal. Either
Kudos
way,
to
she was born
Santos
to a
for
Jewish
screwing
family
everybody
in
over,
an eastern
man.
Ethiopian village. In 1991, Philip's family immigrated to Israel as part of the more than 14,000 Ethiopian Jews involved in Operation Solomon. The
I wonder if she has
Israel-led
any
effort
children.
aimed to rescue Ethiopian Jews from political turmoil and destabilization. When Philip turned 18, she served in the IDF as a gunsmith in a paratroopers unit. Philip recalled her time in the IDF to Jewish Insider. Quote, "I was in charge of all the weapons. I had a great year and 9 months in the army. When you feel you're a part of this society, giving back to this country. Seeing Russians, Ukrainians, Ethiopians, all immigrants together for one goal, to protect
Yo, I thought they were all native to that land. What happened?
Israel," unquote.
And I am a proud IDF soldier!
In Israel, Philip attended the University of Haifa, earning a bachelor's in occupational therapy. She pursued further studies at Tel Aviv University, where she earned a master's in diplomacy and security. During her time at the university, Philip met her future husband, a Ukrainian-born medical student whom she moved to the U.S. with in 2005. Since 2012, Philip has been a registered Democrat, but in 2021, Philip was elected to New York's Nassau County Legislature as a Republican. She won re-election by almost 20 percentage points.
What makes you a Republican and not a Democrat?
My views, my values more rely to the Republican Party. Republican Party
I mean, coming from the IDF, yeah, sure.
is welcoming everyone.
Yes, the Republican Party is famously known for welcoming everyone.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, Philip is setting her sights on representing New York's 3rd District, determined to
Can't
keep
even
it red
say it
following
right,
the
man.
expulsion of the guy who had a knack for lying, but oddly drew the line at knowing who James Baldwin is.
Huh?
James Baldwin.
Who the hell is James Baldwin?
Philip will run against fellow Democrat Tom Suozzi for Santos's vacant seat. The winner of the special election will finish the remainder of the volleyball star's 2-year term in the House, which expires in January 2025. It's unclear where Philip stands on most issues other than taxes, which she doesn't want to increase.
All right, well, she
Policing,
lost
which she
anyway, so don't need to see the last a few seconds of that video. Now, you might say, hey, Johnny, this sounds really anti-Semitic, what you're saying about these people. Why so harsh? Let's talk about weaponizing anti-Semitism, I guess. Here's a quick 10-minute video from
These days,
AJ Plus.
criticizing Israel gets backlash like this.
When the ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism.
From the river to the sea is anti-Semitic.
Those calling for a ceasefire are legitimizing anti-Semitism. But here's the thing.
All right, maybe I need to take a pause for a second. But yeah, having an IDF soldier running in our government is kind of fucked up. The other thing about the IDF is, I was surprised they let her enlist because in general, well, actually, no, never mind. I'm not surprised. In general, they don't let Arab immigrants enlist. I believe the Orthodox Jewish people are not supposed to enlist, but they forced them to enlist in the IDF. There are other rules about the IDF as to who is eligible and who is not eligible and who is required and who is not required. Very interesting stuff to look into. But I've looked into it, obviously. And it definitely holds up the idea that that it is only for particular people to be able to enlist into the IDF, basically.
Investigating Israel for war crimes or demanding a ceasefire in Gaza is not anti-Semitic, which is hatred of Jews. It's criticism of the state of Israel.
Yeah, and that's really what we're doing here is we're being critics of the state of Israel. That is two different things. A lot of people try to conflate both of those things and say that, to talk bad about the state of Israel is to talk bad about the people. That is what has always been the strategy as far as the conflation and kind of why this has been such a taboo subject for so long.
Are not the same thing. So how did criticism of Israel and charges of anti-Semitism come to be interchangeable, and what have the consequences been? I spoke to two Jewish experts who work closely on the issue.
This has become a well-worn strategy of the Israeli government and its defenders to conflate all criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism.
That's Simone Zimmerman, who's with the Diaspora Alliance. It's an organization that fights anti-Semitism and its misuse.
It's an insult to Jewish history, and it cheapens the idea of what these words actually mean.
And this is Laura Friedman, the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace and a leading expert on Israel and Palestine.
So if you can't win the arguments over Israeli policy, you're going to have to just shut down the criticism of Israel. There's something so twisted about where we are today.
So how did we get here? Well, if you listen to the pro-Israel establishment and its supporters, you hear the conflation of two very distinct terms.
Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Period, full stop.
Anti-Zionism is the modern mutated form of anti-Semitism.
The high anti-Semitism now is anti-Zionism.
Okay, let's first unpack the definition of these terms. Anti-Semitism means hatred, prejudice, threats, and violence against Jews because they are Jewish. It's very real and it exists.
It definitely exists. There are a lot of anti-Semitic tropes and a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Like one that I've seen pushed around a lot right now is the whole like 9/11 thing, and I will not get into that. That seems like a very dumb conspiracy theory. But the whole like idea that all the banks are owned by these people, that's an anti-Semitic trope. There's a lot of things that people do say that are very anti-Semitic and that should not be repeated. But there's a lot of that's why we have to try to separate the state from the people and say the behavior of the state is what is going on and what is wrong.
Anti-Semitism in Europe is what led to the Holocaust, during which 6 million Jews were murdered by Nazis. Anti-Zionism, on the other hand, is the movement against Zionism. Zionism is an ideology that took root in the late 19th century among some Jews in Europe. It's the belief that Jews should have their own separate Jewish ethno-state, and it led to the creation of Israel in 1948, at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian population that lived there. Anti-Zionism challenges the very ideological basis of Israel as a nation-state. The movement existed decades before Israel, originally among Eastern European Jews who opposed Zionism's objective of moving Jews out of Europe.
The Zionist project to this day is built on an ideology of supremacy that provides exclusive and superior rights only for Jews. Anti-Zionism rejects that ideology of Jewish supremacy and seeks to dismantle it.
Now, it's important to note that not all Zionists are Jews. In fact, evangelical Christians are some of the most fervent Zionists in the world.
That's kind of the biggest
it's a topic
issue.
I reported on while in Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank.
You would ask, like, why is Mike Pence such a supporter of Israel? There are a lot of Zionists in the United States government that not only see Israel as an ally, but they also see it as a priority religiously. So that's kind of a major problem.
Not all Zionists are Jews. Not all Jews are Zionists, although many are taught from a young age that supporting Israel should be part of their identity.
For me, growing up, being pro-Israel was a core part of my Jewish identity. I saw attacks on Israel as a personal attack.
For decades, there's been a concerted effort to collapse the distinction between the Jewish religion and Zionism. And that significantly ramped up in the 2000s after it became clear that Israeli leaders had abandoned all pretenses of seeking a political solution with Palestinians.
You can no longer with a straight face say that Israel really wants peace, they support a two-state solution, they don't want to oppress the Palestinians. That's where we saw the birth of this new definition of anti-Semitism.
That definition Laura's talking about is at the crux of this growing trend to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. It's known as the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. IRA stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance.
Who could be against an organization that's trying to remember the Holocaust and make sure people don't forget? That's a good...
So, sorry about the ad, but I have to use the ad break to remind me how many hours I am into the stream. Otherwise, I'll stay up until like 3 a.m. streaming, and that ruins my health.
You would think. But in 2016, the definition IRA published included 11 contemporary examples of anti-Semitism, 6 of which relate to Israel, including that it's anti-Semitic to claim that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Side note, Israel was created as a Jewish ethno-state, treating Jewishness as a race, violently expelling the Palestinian majority, and enforcing what even Israel's leading human rights organization calls an apartheid system. But the IHRA definition won't have that.
The argument was made that all or most criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. We're going to put this in a definition. We're now going to take this definition and put it into law around the world. And we're going to use this as a blunt instrument to shut down once and for all these arguments. And that's where we are today.
At least 40 governments have adopted the IHRA definition, as well as hundreds of universities and NGOs around the world, even as scholars and dozens of human rights groups like Amnesty International decry its implementation. That's because the IHRA definition has been weaponized to silence criticism of Israel, curtail freedom of speech.
Yeah, so there's a lot of conflict even within Israel about
found dozens of
this whole topic.
Where IHRA was explicitly used to target those advocating for Palestinian rights throughout Europe, even for something as simple as liking a social media post that condemned Israel's actions. And it's happening in the US too. The US House of Representatives passed a resolution in late 2023 that equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism as defined by IHRA. And the spirit of IHRA is guiding organizations like the Pro-Israel Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, in how they track anti-Semitism. For instance, a recent ADL report found a huge spike in anti-Semitic incidents in the US after October 7th. But when you dig deeper into the numbers, you find that 40% of those incidents were simply pro-Palestine rallies, many of which, by the way, were led by Jewish organizers.
An organization like the ADL have no qualm.
So even the ones that were led by Jewish organizers, they counted as anti-Semitic. Wow.
And just calling thousands of Jews anti-Semitic. The whole thing would be laughable if it weren't so insulting.
And the IHRA definition is finding its way into laws. As of 2024, 4 U.S. states explicitly have the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism in their hate crime laws, with many more attempting to do so.
There's a reason why the people who want to shut down Palestine Voices, Palestine protesters, want the IHRA definition in the hate crimes law. It's being used to attack Palestinian voices or pro-Palestine voices pretty much across every part of society.
And that's especially true on college campuses. U.S. universities have always been a place where anti-Israel speech has been curtailed. But in 2019...
I mean, universities for decades, if not centuries at this point, have been used, have been the center point of protest. If there's any group that's going to get riled up and do a protest and has time to protest, it's going to be students, adults, or that are close to being adults, that are able to, that have the time, that can do these things, that are in prominent locations around the United States. They can conduct these types of protests. Yes, a lot of people have to take the day off in order to do that if they're not in college. Or if they're not part of that group, but to put limits specifically, and just like we saw, one of the heads of the colleges get booted. I don't know if they did all 3 of them, but I know they were going after 3. At least one was. This is kind of the point, is to silence everybody rather than to solve the problem of what is happening in the world. We go to rather to try and shush everybody.
This practice of silencing pro-Palestine voices was legitimized when former President Donald Trump signed an executive order that enforced the IHRA definition on college campuses.
The biggest problem is a chilling effect. We see lawsuit after lawsuit and complaint after complaint targeting activists on campus, targeting administrators, targeting professors. We literally have cases based on somebody had a sign that said "River to the Sea," so you're claiming it's a hate crime.
By the way, it's worth noting that the guy who drafted the IHRA definition later spoke out against how it's been weaponized by the right-wing Jewish community, writing that using IHRA to define hate speech on campus is an attack on free speech and will not only harm pro-Palestinian advocates, but also Jewish students.
Do you see this effort to silence any sort of criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic as harmful to Jews and dangerous?
Absolutely. I have no problem saying absolutely clearly it is anti-Semitic to conflate Israel and Jews. And the ADL and I agree on that. The problem is that what the ADL also say, if you don't conflate Israel and Jews, you're an anti-Semite. And that's incredibly dangerous, because my argument, which says you shouldn't go out and target a Jewish kid because they're Jewish and hold them accountable for what Israel's doing, but you're simultaneously insisting that every Jewish kid on campus support for Israel and Zionism is intrinsic to their identity. You are effectively conflating every Jewish person with the state of Israel. That is incredibly dangerous.
And in the midst of all this, you have Israeli leaders promoting nationalist interests over fighting actual anti-Semitism around the world.
There's a history of Israeli government leaders actually playing down very dangerous forms of right-wing anti-Semitism because some of the very same people that promote that are allies of the Israeli government, who they see as part of building a world of racism and fear and division.
Take, for example, the far-right xenophobic Prime Minister of Hungary, or the Italian Prime Minister, who herself was a member of a neo-fascist.
Yeah, she's a neo-fascist. Giorgia Meloni, neo-fascist. Also, this guy, previous to this, Viktor Orban, also not a good guy. Yeah.
Prime Minister of Hungary, or the Italian Prime Minister, who
those are all fascists. Also, so is this guy.
Herself was a member of a neo-fascist movement as a teenager, who have both found a friend in Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. And of course, former President Trump, who courted white
also fascist
supremacists in his base and called neo-Nazi protesters very fine people. But Israeli leaders like Netanyahu give all of them a pass because they have the right view on Israel. And in the face of the very real threat of anti-Semitism perpetrated by white supremacists, we've also seen some Israeli leaders implicate Palestinians as a similar threat to Jews. In 2018, a white supremacist killed 11 Jewish worshippers at a Pittsburgh synagogue in what was the worst attack on Jews in U.S. history. But listen to how this Israeli leader, speaking to that congregation a few days later, seemingly equated the white supremacist perpetrator with Palestinians, who had nothing to do with the attack.
I'm sorry, he did what? He conflated Palestinians with a white supremacist. So don't get that twisted either. There are definitely white supremacist Nazis that are obviously anti-Semitic because they're fucking Nazis. That's completely different from anybody that's Palestinian. That is a completely different issue.
From Sderot in Israel.
Oh, it's Naftali Bennett.
To Pittsburgh and
Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs.
Pennsylvania. The hand that fires missiles is the same hand that shoots worshippers. We will fight against the hatred of Jews and anti-Semitism wherever.
Naftali Bennett is another nationalist, basically.
You're a direct line from the Pittsburgh shooter to Palestinian militants. There are real reasons why so many Jews are afraid for their own safety. And very often we see Israeli government leaders weaponize that fear and misdirect it at Palestinians. Palestinians are not responsible for the Holocaust, and yet the State of Israel repeatedly uses the memory of the Holocaust to stoke anti-Palestinian racism and to justify its actions against Palestinians.
And to shield itself from international law. When Israel was recently on trial for genocide against Palestinians in Gaza at the International Court of Justice, a court set up in the wake of the Holocaust to prevent the atrocities that Jews had experienced, many Israeli leaders accused the court of anti-Semitism.
The Hague hearing, it's a show of shame,
there he is again.
Hypocrisy, and blatant anti-Semitism.
The idea that the Israeli government...
Also, you read that right. If you did read that, he was the Israeli Prime Minister from 2021 to 2022, basically in between the two Netanyahu Prime Minister runs.
And blatant anti-Semitism.
He was not right-wing enough for the government, so they had to bring Netanyahu back.
The idea that the Israeli government is weaponizing
that guy was not right-wing enough.
Legacy of these international institutions to evade any consequences for the atrocities in Gaza. It's such a tragedy of history.
Anti-Semitism is a very real threat to the millions of Jews around the world.
And it definitely is.
For a free Palestine, holding a pro-Palestine rally, or demanding Israel be held accountable for war crimes are not anti-Semitic actions. Saying they are only leads to dangerous trends, suppressing free speech, allowing Israel to evade accountability, and obscuring actual anti-Semitism.
So yeah, that's kind of the... okay, I gotta close that.
These days...
There we go. I think it's getting out of control. I hate autoplay so much. But yeah, to say that, there's another thing that they say is that Israel is the safest place for the Jewish people. You could argue that it's definitely not. Not only does it endanger the people that are living there because of the constant conflict that is happening, a lot of it you could say that is initiated by either side. I don't want to play both sides here. But there is a constant aggression of the IDF into other countries, whether it's directly bombing them, like they're currently doing right now with Lebanon, or even Syria, or whether it's assassinations that they conduct, like the multiple attempted assassinations on Iranian nuclear scientists. Not only there, but there is a history of attempted assassinations throughout the region, and really even in Europe, by the IDF that has been attempted. Those types of actions generally end up with somebody acting out against Israel or trying to fight them. That does not make it a safe place. Israel is not a large nation state. It is roughly the size of New Jersey. You endanger the people that live there by doing those types of actions. And then I would assume that's why you see the militarization of the people that live there, the required enlistment of conscripts into the IDF. And it just leads to so many problems. To say that there's a lot of people there's a saying that comes from the IDF or the Israeli government is that it's the safest place for their people. It really isn't. They make it a much more dangerous place for people to live. And especially with the actions that they perform, like bombing Gaza, killing 28,000 people now, it doesn't reflect well for the people that are associated with that state.
This is Democracy Now!
Anyways, so speaking of the IDF, let's see what they've been up to this week. It was not good. So this is the Hind Rajab story.
For the War and Peace Report, I'm Amy Goodman. We turn to Gaza, to a case that's reverberated around the world. 2 weeks ago, January 29th, 6-year-old Hind Rajab climbed into a car with her aunt, her uncle, and her cousins in Gaza City as they prepared to flee to the southern part of Gaza. But as they were in the car, an Israeli tank approached them and opened fire. Hind's 15-year-old cousin, Leon, called the Red Crescent for help. These were her last words recorded on the call with a Red Crescent dispatcher.
Hello?
Hello, dear?
They are shooting at us.
Hello?
They are shooting at us. The tank is next to me.
Are you hiding?
Yes, in the car. We're next to the tank.
Are you inside the car?
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
That was 15-year-old Leon's last words, killed along with the rest of her family. The only one who remained alive was 6-year-old Hind. Wounded, she called the Red Crescent back, pleading with the dispatcher to be rescued.
Come take me. You will come and take me?
Do you want me to come and take you?
I'm so scared. Please come. Please call someone to come and take me.
Okay, dear. I will come and take you.
After seeking approval from the Israeli military, 2 emergency workers with the Palestine Red Crescent, Yusuf Seino and Ahmed Almadoun, went to try to rescue 6-year-old Hind. But dispatchers lost contact with the medics. Nearly 2 weeks later, Israeli forces finally withdrew from the area, and on Saturday, Hind's surviving family ventured back to the neighborhood. They found Hind dead inside the car, alongside the bodies of 5 of her family members. The car was riddled with bullet holes. The bodies of the 2 emergency workers were also found in an ambulance nearby, appeared to have been killed by Israeli fire just yards away from the car. This is Hind's mother, Wissam Hamada, after she learned of her daughter's killing.
My
heart is completely destroyed over my daughter. 2 weeks. They killed them. 2 weeks they were in that car. I've told the world from day one, please go get Hind. God is the only one sufficient for us. Everyone failed us. I will tell God on the day of judgment about my daughter. I swear I will never forgive you or any human involved or any human rights organization.
For more on this case, we're joined now by Nabal Farsakh, spokesperson for the Palestine Red Crescent Society, joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nabal, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us everything you know about this case.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. We at the Palestine Red Crescent were heartbroken and devastated again after learning the fate of our colleagues Yusuf, Zaino, and Ahmed al-Madhoun. The ambulance was found bombed just meters away from the car where Hind was trapped. The story began after we have received a call from the uncles of Hind and Layan, who live overseas, reporting that there's 2 little girls are still survived after their family car was targeted by the Israeli tanks. He gave us a phone number, we called, and then Layan picked up the phone, and this is the call which you just preview it. Layan was killed while she was over the phone with our dispatch center, and then we have called the number again, and Hind, which picked up the phone. Hind was supposed to turn into 6 years in May, and now she has lost her life. Over 3 hours, Hind was over the phone with our dispatch center. She was repeatedly seeking help, repeatedly appealing for our teams to come and pick her up. It took us all of this time, over 3 hours, in order to coordinate safe access for our ambulances. And once the green light was given, the ambulance headed to the location, and upon its arrival, they have reported that there is a green laser on them, that the Israeli occupation forces pointing a laser.
So the laser is for laser-guided munitions, with which JDAMs go off of. So they were being targeted to be bombed.
On them, and then we have heard a sound of gunfire or a bombardment. It wasn't that much clear, and the connection was lost. For over 12 days, we were uncertain regarding the fate of our colleagues Yusuf and Ahmed and the little girl Hind. We were thinking that they might be arrested. There was so many questions, like if they were succeeded to rescue Hind or not, because basically also they have confirmed that they can see the car of Hind and they were so close to Hind. It is just devastated to learn that Hind passed away alone. She was killed alone and scared, and our rescue teams were only meters away from her.
And can you explain the weapon found by the ambulance?
We're not sure regarding the weapon found next to the ambulance. According to reports, it is an artillery shelling, US made, was found next to the ambulance, which was bombed by the Israeli occupation forces while they were trying to save 6-year-old Hind. It's just so much sad to see paramedics losing their life while they are trying to save people's life. What was the fault of Yusuf and Ahmed? Their fault was they went in a rescue mission to save a 6-year-old girl. It was a coordinated mission, and the green light was given, and the Israeli occupation forces intentionally bombed the Palestine Red Crescent ambulance, which has clearly the Red Crescent emblem on top of the ambulance and from all the sides. There was no way or no option to be by mistake. It is an intentional targeting. Since the beginning of the war, we have lost 14 PRCS members. All of them were killed while they were on duty trying to save people's life.
And what does the Israeli military explain to you, given that you got permission for your rescue workers to go rescue Hind as the world heard her 6-year-old pleas for help?
Up to this moment, the Israeli military didn't comment or reply at what happened. And even during the 12 days, we have tried repeatedly, even through the ICRC, to ask the Israeli occupation forces regarding what happened to Hind and the rescue team. And all the time they were mentioning they don't have info regarding this incident. To turn out, after 12 days, they have bombed the ambulance and still they don't have info regarding the incident.
Yeah,
I want to turn to another
bullshit.
case. The Palestine Red Crescent has just posted new video online as evidence that their ambulance was shot at and its staff were, quote, brutally assaulted by Israeli forces.
Jesus.
PRCS said the video was taken around a week ago and shows a Red Crescent paramedic with 2 black eyes sitting in an ambulance that is pockmarked by bullet holes. The organization says the attack happened as the ambulance crew was delivering oxygen cylinders to Al-Amal Hospital in Gaza. It also stated that Israel had claimed they had transferred the oxygen cylinders to Al-Amal Hospital. Can you explain what took place here in this video that we're watching?
Yes, for over a week, Al-Amal Hospital was run out of oxygen. This has resulted to 3 of our patients died because of the lack of oxygen. After we managed to coordinate getting oxygen cylinders to the hospital via the ICRC, our ambulance heads to bring the oxygen cylinders from Nasser Hospital and to transport them to Al-Amal Hospital. And
okay, so I'm going to pause it there. But yeah, obviously a lot of atrocities have occurred. One thing about laser-guided munitions, I wanted to bring this up. So what we handed over to the IDF some odd years ago was roughly 30,000 dumb bombs. In addition to that, we gave them JDAMs, which is kind of a kit that you put on a dumb bomb to make it somewhat of a smart bomb. And while it doesn't have, like, you know, drone controls, video controls, and whatnot, what you can do is you can do laser guidance. And what laser guidance does is basically in the JDAM kit, you essentially turn this bomb that would usually go straight from up to down, and hopefully you drop it in the right spot and it hits your target. Rather than that, it kind of like gets guided by the laser and hits whatever target you want within a certain amount of meters. The MK-80 is a United States produced bomb. It is a dumb bomb. In this example, they're using the skydivers to show that, you know, you can control movement fairly easily, but even easier with fins. And so the lasers kind of tell the bomb where to go, the fins adjust that, and then boom, the IDF can blow up a relatively small ambulance in comparison to the area that Gaza is.
The ambulance, Israeli occupation forces opened fire at the hospital and they insult and beat our paramedic who was trying to move and transport this oxygen cylinder, which is life-saving for our patients. This is not the first attack, because at that moment, also a week ago, the Israeli occupation forces raided Al-Amal Hospital. They have destroyed medical equipment and they dehumanized the medical staff, patients, and their companions. They arrested 9 of the Palestine Red Crescent members from Al-Amal Hospital, including 4 doctors and a nurse. They have beaten the staff, deny them, not allowing them to drink water or even to go use the toilet, and tie their hands on their backs. The situation is extremely dangerous inside Al-Amal Hospital. We are still extremely worried regarding the safety of our teams who were arrested from Al-Amal Hospital. Today, 2 of them were arrested, were released, but 7 of our PRCS members still detained up to this moment, who were arrested from inside Al-Amal Hospital. Al-Amal Hospital is under besiege and continuous attack for the 25th day. Today, Israeli occupation forces targeted the second floor of the hospital with artillery shelling. Gladly, only damage for 2 of the nursing rooms, but there was no injuries among the staff or the patients. But the situation remains very dangerous, with Israeli tanks are in front of the hospital, besieging the hospital, continuous gunfire and bombardment surrounding the hospital. No one is able to go in or go out of the hospital. There is no food, no water, extreme shortage of medicine and medical supplies inside the hospital.
To commit
the situation is
genocide.
beyond dire.
Nabal, I asked you about Israeli response. I want to ask you about the U.S. government response and how important it is. This
what
is
are
a
we
clip
doing
of
about
State
it?
Department spokesperson Matt Miller at a news conference on Wednesday. He was questioned about the killing of 6-year-old Hind and her family by a reporter from The Intercept, Prem Thacker.
It's been over 2 weeks since Israeli forces attacked Hind al-Arab's family, killing her aunt, uncle, and cousins, leaving her trapped alone in her vehicle. We heard her pleas to the Red Crescent Society. 2 medics were sent, all to be blown up allegedly by Israeli forces. I wanted to ask about the status of the inquiry into this, just because it seems if the Israeli government, which seemingly does have a pretty sophisticated operation, is prioritizing this, and they don't already know which soldiers to interview, for instance. They have Red Crescent calls, timestamps, the location, other Red Crescent staff to, question and rely on. Plenty of material to figure out who exactly to inquire with and to figure out who to hold accountable. So I want to first ask about the status of this.
Sure. So I think that question is appropriately directed to the government of Israel. I will say on behalf of the United States, we have made clear to them that.
So that's always the defense for these guys that are representatives of the current administration is like, I can't answer that. You would have to ask the Israeli government. That is their shield. That is their excuse. They will always and forever use that because it deflects. It's like, oh, you're not asking the right person. Sometimes it's you're not asking the right question. But yeah, don't ask me. I just work here, kind of thing.
We want that incident to be investigated. They have told us they are investigating it. It's our understanding that investigation is not yet complete. Should direct questions to them about where it stands, but we want to see it completed as soon as possible. And as I said from this podium,
this twink is a demon. I hope nothing good happens to you after you leave this administration.
Several days ago, if accountability is appropriate, we want to see accountability put in place.
Nabal Parsak, we just have 30 seconds. That's the State Department spokesperson. How important is pressure from the United States and Israel, as you talked about a U.S. weapon being found near the shelled ambulance?
It is extremely important. The life and the story of Hind should not be end in this way. We're talking about 6-year-old girl. She was trapped in her family car for hours after everyone was killed and targeted by Israeli occupation forces. During this, even 2 paramedics who went to rescue the 6-year-old girl was also targeted, and their ambulance was bombed. We need to see
bombed.
Actions happened and to put Israel accountable for committing such crime against a 6-year-old girl and civilians who were trapped in their car.
We thank you so much for joining us, spokesperson for Palestine Red Crescent.
They always run out of time. That is the problem with the media in the United States, is if it's not online, like this is, like what I'm doing right now, where I essentially have however much time in the day, you're limited to your 30-minute, 45-minute, 1-hour takes with commercials or whatever support that you can get in between. That is the problem with capitalist funded media here. Democracy Now!, I believe, is funded by its donators, by people that donate to it. But even they have limitations as far as time slots and whatnot goes. Also, of course, there's that thing about paying people and making sure that your staff is adequately paid. Okay, this is, I don't know if I can show this. It's probably going to get me in trouble, at least with if this was on Instagram. I can definitely say the the green headband seems to be banned on any Meta platform. It seems to automatically recognize that. But this is a CBS News report from CBS News. Hamas recruiter discusses group's rising popularity in the West Bank. Now, there's two angles to this story. Before, I haven't even watched it yet, but what I will say about this is there's two angles here, right? One is kind of what the mainstream media wants to do with this story is paint everybody in the West Bank as supporters of Hamas. Now, there's a reason that they would do that, is it would give an excuse for the IDF to conduct the same type of actions that they've conducted in Gaza in the West Bank, which, if you're unaware, they kind of already are. There's kind of if you saw the hospital assassination that happened a couple weeks ago, they're kind of already operating in that fashion. I don't think that they've done bombing campaigns, but they've certainly done assassinations. They've certainly done kind of like hit squad tactics, where they go into, for example, Jenin, and look for specific people, murder them, or kidnap them, and then go back into Israel. That's kind of been the IDF strategy with the West Bank. Now, I believe what they want to do is kind of paint it that way, but also this kind of shows the dangers that the IDF is causing with their actions in Gaza. Like I said not too long ago, maybe like 10, 20 minutes ago, the actions that the IDF, the actions that the Israeli government performs, is leading to more hatred towards their government, more hatred towards their entity of the state. And, people will most likely join groups that are doing something to ensure their survivability. And that is a problem, because you cause more conflict, you cause more danger with the actions that you're taking. When I say you, I say the IDF. But let's see what CBS News has to say about it. I want to see what angle they're going to shoot off at. Does this even have sound? Oh, I muted it. My bad. Unmute this thing.
Deeper inroads in Hamas has been making deeper inroads in the West Bank since its war with Israel began in October. And
hold on, what did he say?
Hamas has been making deeper inroads in the West Bank since its war with it.
Oh, I guessed that right.
Israel began in October, and our Deborah Pata spoke with a Hamas commander in the territory about the militant group's growing popularity and what it could indicate about the future of the conflict.
And while there are representatives of Hamas in, for example, like Jenin, the Jenin brigades are made up of several different factions to defend Jenin, which is a city in the West Bank, which is kind of weird because the IDF goes in and out of Jenin, and they go and try to find these people, and they can't, and then they scramble and they leave again, and then they repeat, and then sometimes they do hit squad assassinations. It's kind of weird, but again, Hamas itself is a government entity. You could have members of the government, but you could also have members of the militant group, which is the IQB, be there as well.
After more than 4 months of war, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's goal remains the same.
Destroy Hamas.
And in the occupied West Bank, the war in Gaza...
They gave him 3 words. 2 words.
...is having the opposite effect, fueling Palestinian rage, an endless cycle of dust.
And that's what I said. If you continue with these actions, you're going to fuel rage.
despair,
and maybe that's the
and
point.
death.
Maybe that's what that asshole wants.
And that rage has a receptive home, young Palestinians who are disenchanted and defiant. Support for Hamas has soared from 14 to 42% since October 7th, according to a recent poll. We met a Hamas commander at an undisclosed location in the West Bank.
Are you a wanted man?
I am, indeed.
Calling himself Abu Abed, he joined 9 years ago when he was just 16. Almost half that time was spent in jail. Now he is a Hamas recruiter.
Are you seeing more young people joining Hamas here in the West Bank since October 7th?
For sure. All the Palestinian people are standing by Hamas. I give the fighters guidance. When Israeli forces enter, I tell them what to do and how to open fire.
And while the world recoiled in horror at the savagery and wanton violence of the October 7 massacre, chillingly, he sees it as an act.
So this is savagery. Savagery? I can't say the word. Anyway, but bombing 28,000 people is just a statistic, I guess.
Of resistance.
So, on October the 7th,
savagery.
Women and children were murdered.
We see death every single day. Israel lost what? 1,000 or 2,000 people killed. That's nothing.
But it doesn't make it right to kill women and children.
This is my land. My land. We repeatedly told Israel to get out peacefully, and they refused. So it's only normal that we take it back by force.
Yeah, that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Palestine, the West Bank, is Palestine. It is not Israel. While it might be controlled or occupied, that is one of the reasons that they call it the occupied West Bank. It is still Palestine. It is not Israel.
He blindly repeats the blatant lie that no civilians were killed by Hamas on October 7th.
We don't fight civilians. We have always fought against the army.
I don't know how. I can't address that, but I will say that it seems like the October 7th, the Al-Aqsa flood was purposefully to go after the IDF, specifically God, what was it? The battalion that's in. Damn, now I'm forgetting already. So I'd have to pull up the Swords of Iron. So this is their Swords of Iron casualties page. Will this pull up? Yeah, there it is. So this is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Israeli government themselves. And of course, the topic is Swords of Iron, which is the current campaign that they're conducting. These are all the 570 IDF casualties that occurred. If you scroll all the way down, you'll see a huge list of names that occurred on October 7th. The battalion that they were targeting was the Golani. You can see a lot of them have died in recent campaigns, recent skirmishes, but the majority were attacked on October 7th. So what he says is that they say that they didn't kill any civilians. It's possible. I don't know what to say about that. I think that anything is possible at that point. But what you can identify from this information is that they targeted specifically IDF soldiers. And specifically IDF soldiers that were in the Golani infantry. So that's something that is not talked about very often.
their remorse for the more than 28,000 Palestinians killed,
What?
nearly 2/3 of them women and children, in Israel's bombardment of Gaza.
You had to have known that that would have been Israel's response, that Palestinians would suffer as a result. So is there any regret?
We are not pleased with that, but this is the path of the armed struggle.
How can she say that he doesn't care? He said they're not pleased with that.
Gershon Baskin is a veteran Israeli hostage negotiator. He knows Hamas well.
The more that Israel hits Hamas, the stronger Hamas will grow.
And as for Netanyahu's repeatedly stated aim,
I'm sorry, what do you
the
say?
stronger Hamas will grow.
And as for Netanyahu's repeatedly stated aim of eliminating Hamas,
there is no elimination of Hamas. Israel can defeat Hamas militarily, but the only way you defeat an idea and an ideology is by providing a better idea and a better ideology.
Exactly.
Baskin points out that for decades, Palestinians have been living under the boot of Israeli occupation in the West Bank. He says Netanyahu's biggest crime was not failing to prevent October 7th, but allowing Israelis to believe the status quo could remain.
He convinced the Israeli people and the world that Israel can occupy another people for 56 years and expect to have peace, or lock 2.2 million people in a territory like Gaza with 80% poverty and expect to have quiet. You can't have it all. We got to share this place.
He's right.
Baskin says young Palestinians grow up believing they must die for Palestine.
And Palestinians need to learn that they can live for Palestine. That will happen when Palestine becomes real for them. It's about time that the United States, for example, recognizes the state of Palestine.
Until then, he believes violence and hatred continue on an endless loop.
So where does this all end? All this killing, all this suffering?
The killing and the suffering ends when the Israelis walk out of our land. But if they decide to stay, we shall continue to fight. And if I die, somebody else will take my place.
So he wants a two-state solution.
Baskin told us he finds it hard to believe Hamas will continue to run Gaza after the war, but asks the same question, where it all ends, when Palestinians are also seen as people with hopes and dreams.
They're not different from other people. They deserve to live in freedom too. The same right to the same rights. That's the basis of a new beginning, the same right to the same rights.
Well, John, as you point out,
And what he's alluding to there is the different rights that Palestinians have in Israel, the apartheid, and really the segregation. I think there's roughly 60 or 70 something laws that are specific to Palestinians that prevent them from having the same rights as Israelis if they are Israeli citizens. There are roughly 2 million Palestinians that live in Israel. I've said that before. That's what he's alluding to. But in my opinion, I think a one-state solution would be the ideal thing. Equal rights across the board. And you just go back and call it Palestine. How about that?
under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it's clearly not viable. He's been against the idea of statehood for Palestinians for years, and in fact has undermined the Palestinian Authority, which runs the West Bank, and has been in this alliance with the far right, with this.
And that's why nobody really likes the Palestinian Authority, because they're seen as nothing more than lapdogs for the Israeli government.
Settlers in the West Bank. But ironically, I suppose, in Gaza, the war in Gaza has actually put a two-state solution center stage once again, with renewed international calls to make it a reality. Imagine 5 rounds of elections here in Israel, and the Palestinian issue was never talked about. But as Gershon Baskin told us, it is the only existential issue facing Israel. And depending on who you talk to, many political analysts here believe that the era of Netanyahu as leader is over, that he will not survive politically once this war is over. And then the hope is that new leadership can look more forward perhaps and start talking about real peace and real solutions here.
And Deborah, what's your assessment of the post-conflict leadership? I mean, what happens to Hamas? How has the reputation of Hamas changed since?
Dog, what happened to the fucking revolutionaries in the United States when they rebelled against the British government? What do you mean?
This conflict has started.
Well, as we've been saying in our piece, in the West Bank, support for Hamas has risen, but in Gaza, it has not. That same poll that saw support for Hamas soaring in the West Bank saw it really leveling out in Gaza. And in fact, we've been seeing a lot of Gazans who
when she says leveling out, it's still high.
Have been speaking out against Hamas, who are fed up with Hamas, who are fed up with the war, something they would never have done before October the 7th under Hamas rule. And obviously Gaza is where the suffering is and where there has been what aid agencies call the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And when you've lost everything, when you have nothing left, perhaps it does become a little bit easier to speak out. But there is a view that after this war, it will be very difficult for Hamas to run Gaza and to have any role in running Gaza at all.
Deborah Pata for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you.
These days, criticizing Israel gets back.
Chill out. Oh, God.
Hamas
I'm doing it again. Chill. Hamas. Oh, my God. Everything's autoplaying.
I make
Stop it. So that was roughly 2 hours of...